And the time is 7:45 p.m. And a big welcome to everyone who's watching us this evening. It's nice to be back with another in our series relating to the Israeli elections. And I'm joined by Josh Shevitz and David Cohen. David, let's get you unmuted so we can actually have a discussion. So, Dave, you've been following these elections, I imagine, with much enthusiasm. How are you tracking? What do you think?
Oh, it's been really a roller coaster, to be very honest. It's very interesting. I mean, every time there's an Israeli election, I think the Israelis say that it's going to be the most consequential election in the history of the modern state. But really, this one really could be. The most interesting thing that I've heard anecdotally is the number of Israelis who are flying back to Israel specifically to vote. It's something I've never heard before. And I'm understanding that even companies are arranging their employees who may be based in America to fly back for this election so they can vote. It's quite interesting.
No, my
So I
wife is
actually
doing
had
that.
breakfast. I had breakfast with a friend of mine who's here from Israel, and he's coming back next month or the month after. And I said, "Well, stay for Jewish Achiever Awards. It's on the 1st of November." And he said, "Absolutely not. I'm flying back. I'm going to be voting in the Israeli elections, and that's the most important thing I can do."
Yep.
So, Josh, you must have an Israeli citizenship somewhere.
I do, and my wife is
And
flying
does
back
that
to vote, but I'm not.
really? Is she dumping you with the kids?
Yes, for the second time this year.
Oh, really?
All four
Okay.
of them.
But I think all 4 kids, my goodness, you were fruitful and multiplied.
Yeah, well, it is a Torah principle, I guess.
Uh, did either of you guys go to Limud? Limud was this past weekend in Johannesburg, and I think the weekend before that in Cape Town. Did either of you get to see any of
Yeah,
the amazing Limud speakers?
I was there. I saw Dan Pfefferman, who also spoke very highly of the guest we're having today. Uh, he said Nadav is brilliant and has a lot of knowledge, so that was nice to hear. And
So
also, I spoke to
tell
a Phil
people who
myself.
Dan Pfefferman is, please.
Dan Pfefferman is an Israeli political analyst and expert in Arab affairs. He has also recently started a new media group, which has a focus on the Arab world, trying to focus on the not necessarily the positive, but trying to reshape the image of firstly, what the Middle East is, and also the information that people get from the Middle East, so that
So
it's not just Al
his
Jazeera.
channel is called Middle East 24, and they're
Yeah.
in partnership with Visegrad. And Visegrad is a Polish-based Twitter account, one of the most popular news Twitter accounts actually in the world. And one of the founders is in fact a Polish South African Catholic who went back to Poland to start Visegrad, and they're in partnerships with Middle East 24. In fact, that may
That's
be a
interesting.
very interesting webinar that we do at some point in time.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Josh,
Yeah.
Josh, tell us who else at Limud you liked.
Well, I spoke myself, so I like that one.
Did your audience like you, Dave? Did you go see him?
I was unfortunately away, so I missed Limud this year, which was unfortunate because I would have loved to see Josh and Dan Pfefferman.
Yeah.
So I can tell you,
Nick Rabinovich was great, obviously.
Gilly Apter did a Saturday night show at Limud Johannesburg that was absolutely sensational. She was so funny. It was amazing. And one of the others that I really loved, there was an archaeologist who had come out from Israel. And he was very special.
Yeah. I think what most stood out for me, I mean, the talks were great, obviously, but what stood out for me was the number of attendance. It was full. It was chock-a-block full, and every single talk was full as well. And that's nice to see that it's something that the community likes.
It's very vibrant in Johannesburg. I know we had about 540 people who stayed over from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then probably another 400 people who arrived on Sunday. So there were probably close to 1,000 people in Johannesburg for that.
Wow.
Very nice.
But last night I actually was at a concert. And this fantastic singer whose name is going to escape me for a second, Avram Fried, was here last night. And he's got a remarkable, unbelievable voice. And I would call him maybe the Haredi version of Bono. And this was Haredi Woodstock last night. And it was fantastic to see the entire Monte Casino Theatre, which I think seats over 2,000 people, completely packed. People literally singing from the boxes and dancing from the boxes, and kids out in front and kept on storming the stage. It was like a mosh pit of Haredi people. It was absolutely sensational to watch, and it just shows the amazing diversity within our community. And when people have world-class entertainment and world-class performers and world-class speakers, they actually come. So, Dave, tell us about tonight's speaker a little bit. Why him?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been, as someone who has lived in Israel, I'm very keen to understand a little bit more about what's going on, obviously reading as much as I can. And Nadav Eyal is someone that I've been tracking quite a bit through his association with Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back, and also his newsletter. And, you know, when we had his other Call Me Back colleague, Amit Segal, come on, I think we had a lot of people. I remember how you saying, you know, a lot of people saying, you know, he's super right wing, and how could we only get this opinion? I said, whoa, don't worry. We're going to get a lot of different perspectives on this series. And that is one of the reasons why Nadav Eyal is coming on, because I think he represents maybe a bit more center left perspective in the Israeli setting. And he's unbelievably articulate in English, but as an Israeli, he can really convey the kind of tachlis about what's going on that I think we really need to hear.
So what I thought was amazing, that when we had Amit Segal, and we knew he was going to be right-wing, many people consider him almost a spokesperson for Netanyahu, and his father was arrested in the 1980s on charges of terrorism, of attacking Palestinian mayors, in fact. But that having been said, I found him completely reasonable.
Yeah.
And sorry, please continue.
No, I wanted to add to that. I actually learned reading one of his newsletters that I think it was his grandfather or his grand uncle was actually killed by the Haganah in a reprisal against the Irgun. And because it's the one of the anniversaries of the Altalena, which was the famous bombing of the Irgun ship outside Tel Aviv, and it was, obviously very. So his kind of family is a really unbelievable and very interesting kind of cross section of that. Part of that. Interesting.
They actually found the ship. Well, they announced having found the ship a few days ago.
Yes, exactly.
And for those people who don't know the story of Altalena, amazing story, but at the time when David Ben-Gurion was trying to unite all the Jewish forces in the land of Israel, and the Irgun and Lehi weren't so keen to join up with the Haganah and be part of what became the IDF, and were bringing in their own shipments of weapons. The Altalena was bringing in shipments of weapons from France, and Ben-Gurion gave the instruction to bomb the ship, rather than to create an alternative non-monopoly on power. So Nadav Eyal, you are joining us. We're busy pre-chatting. We're going to go live to our audience in about 7 minutes, but we still have hundreds and hundreds of people who are busy watching us across Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. But a big welcome to you tonight. I'm not sure if Nadav is actually hearing us yet.
I am, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Tell us where in the world you actually are.
Right now, I'm not far from New York. I'm beginning to teach my semester in a few weeks, and then I'll be heading back to Israel.
So most importantly, we were talking a few moments ago about Israelis returning to Israel to vote in these elections. Is that something that you're going to do?
Oh, of course. Not only to vote, I'm coming to report, to vote. My wife is also coming to vote. Yeah, of course.
So tell us, it can't be easy in the run-up to an election to be out of the country. When you were contemplating whether to go and lecture in the United States, was that a factor in thinking, well, I can report from afar
now.
Oh, really?
But I'm spending half of my time here and half of my time in Israel anyway. So I'm flying in and out all the time. I'm dividing my time because I'm a very active journalist in Israel, right? And so it's very important for me to travel to Israel a lot.
How has the Call Me Back podcast changed your life at all? Because you were certainly a very well-renowned figure in Israel, but now you've become an internationally renowned figure through the podcast. Do people recognize you as you walk down the streets? Is there a sense of fame that comes with it?
Well, first of all, Howard, thank you so much for being so positive about that, and you're too kind. I definitely did not become an international figure. I do get sometimes people in New York identifying me in the street. I'm used for Israelis to know who I am because I spend a lot of years on Israeli TV, and definitely it was a changing event for me to be on Call Me Back. It's Dan Sirnor's project is a very impressive, I think one of the most impressive endeavors of the Jewish community, the global Jewish community after October 7. And I feel many people felt this attachment as a result of the podcast. And it's mostly Dan's show, right? And I feel very privileged to be a guest there.
And so I don't know if you've met our colleagues from the South African Zionist Federation. We have Josh and Dave online. They're in fact the ones who organized and facilitated our discussion this evening. So please greet my colleagues over there.
Hi.
How's it, Nadav? Nice to meet you.
Nice to be with you.
So we're going to go live, although we have an audience already watching us in 4 minutes. And I'm asking the people who are already watching us this evening, if you can just post in the chat, whether you're watching us on Zoom, Facebook, or YouTube, just post in the chat and let us know where in the world you're watching us from. I see that Tzipora is in Israel and Charlotte is in the Netherlands, and we've got some people in Johannesburg. So a big welcome. We're calling this the 200th webinar of the South African Jewish Report. So Nadav, we began this at the start of COVID. We started with COVID education in the days before no one had ever heard the word Zoom and no one had ever heard the word webinar. And we thought it would last 1 or 2 broadcasts. And we are delighted to host you on broadcast number 200.
Oh, congratulations! It's
Watched
wonderful,
by
and
about
it's very life changing. I guess in the world of communities, the ability to have these kind of Zoom meetings and webinars definitely is something I do a lot. So good for you. Happy
so
birthday.
you will thank you, and you'll see that we have someone watching from Baltimore. Neil is in London. Julian is in Durban. Jeffrey is in Netanya. We've in West Cornwall. We've got Stephanie. So we have people in. Lauren is in Netanya. Hi from
Somebody
Israel.
from the Garden
Says
Route.
sorry.
Somebody from the Garden Route and Cape Town, finally.
Gail Lustig is in Tel Aviv, and she says hi. And Vivi's in Harare. So you understand the international nature of the sort of discussion that we have been having tonight.
That's wonderful.
So Nadav, if we start at the end before we begin, what's the one message you think we should walk away with tonight?
The one message. Look, I don't come with a specific message. Messages are for politicians, as far as I'm concerned, Howard. This is not something usually I push. What I try to give is insight and nuance to that degree. I think that this election that we're going to have in Israel is Israel's most important elections, probably in its history. It's definitely the most consequential in thinking about October 7. We did have elections after wars and after catastrophes like 1973, but we never had an election so far afterwards. And that means that things can change. They can change dramatically. Every election campaign is a celebration for democracy if it conducts itself well and with no violence, and the elections themselves are held in transparency. And usually this is the case in Israel. And I can only hope that this would be the case this time. Things are very tense, so I don't want to sugarcoat that. Many people see this as a test to Israeli democracy and as an election that will determine the fate of the country for many years to come.
So I have one question for you. We hosted Amit Segal a few weeks ago, thanks to our friends at the South African Zionist Federation from Cape Town, who did this. And I got a slew of people complaining before the webinar. He was excellent on the webinar, but a slew of people complaining and saying, how in fact can you have someone so right-wing on your show? No one has complained about you being on our broadcast. Okay. Why?
I don't know if I should feel it see this as a compliment or as an insult. I would absolutely want people to complain on me coming to your podcast.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Someone will complain.
I don't know. I'm not going to speculate about why people complain on Amit or don't complain on me. But let me tell you, it's happening also vice versa. So I definitely think a person is measured not only by his allies but also by his enemies, and I have definitely have my own set of critics and people who will describe themselves as enemies of at least my opinions, if not me myself. I debate and speak together with Amit on Call Me Back all the time. As people listening know, we differ on our approaches, but we try to maintain a very civil discourse. And I think we succeed to that extent in doing so. But have no doubt, we think very differently on the Israeli society and on the junction of this election.
Well, the time has just gone 8 p.m. in South Africa, 9 p.m. in Israel, and sitting on the east coast of the United States is Nadav Eyal. Nadav, what time is it on your side of the world?
It's just approaching 2 p.m.
So on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, welcome to our 200th webinar in the series that we began in the first week of COVID. And we're delighted this evening to be partnering once again with the South African Zionist Federation, with the Cape Council. And we are joined this evening by Josh Shevitz and David Cohen from the South African Zionist Federation. And guys, just such an honor and privilege to be able to continue this series on the Israeli elections, which you've put together. So David and Josh, thank you so much for doing with us. And let's give you a word before we say we're putting you on hold and turning off your cameras.
No, just one. It's been an absolute privilege to work with you, and we look forward to doing more of these together.
Fantastic. Josh?
It's just wonderful to be able to provide speakers that the community responds so positively to. And looking forward to hearing from Nadav, and looking forward to the future seminars that we will have, webinars.
Cool. Great, guys. Thank you. We'll see you a little later. And just a reminder to everyone who's watching us this evening, whether you're watching us on YouTube, on Zoom, or on Facebook, you can be part of this conversation. It's not just a dialogue between Nadav and myself. This is very much something that we can all participate in. So please use the chat on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, and just make a comment, give us some advice, ask a question, and we'll make sure that Gilana, who is on duty this evening, will bring all of those questions across onto this discussion as well. If we can begin by just talking about the Jewish Report. The latest edition went online a little earlier this evening. It's a remarkable edition, and Gilana is going to show us the front page. And the front page this week deals with the crazy Turk, Mehmet Dag, who appeared in court this week on anti-Semitism charges in South Africa. If you want to choose your enemies, this is the guy to choose. Not only is he completely insane, but he arrives in court shouting death to Israel after having made a slew of vicious anti-Semitic comments. And then what happens? He starts screaming at the judge, accusing the judge of having put him in Portsmouth jail for 3 months where he nearly died. The only trouble is he got the wrong judge. And when she pointed it out to him, he said, well, you know, it's very difficult. All black women look the same. So if you want to choose your enemies, Mehmet Dag is the one to choose. It's a fantastically funny article. Go read it. It's something that we're very, very delighted to bring to you. So you can go and either collect your hard copy edition of the Jewish Report newspaper, of course, free of charge, distributed in about 240 locations around South Africa. So go to Kosher World, go to your butchery, go to your pharmacy, go to Dischem, go to Pick and Pay, go to Checkers, but pick up your copy of the Jewish Report no matter where you are. If you can't get a hard copy and you prefer to read us online, don't forget you can go onto www.sajr.co.za. You can either download the full edition, or alternatively, you can go and click on each individual article by itself. And don't forget, we have a newsletter. We, in fact, have 3 newsletters that go out every week. If you want to subscribe to our newsletter, the bit.ly code, bit.ly/SAJR inbox, and we will send you 3 newsletters a week. We're currently seeing about 280,000 people on our website every month, people clicking on the news articles and actually coming to have a look and to read, which is amazing. Much more than just our community. People are reading and watching us right around the world. And we saw that this evening in the chat section where people told us where they're watching from. So in conclusion, just 1 or 2 quick things to remember. All of our webinars are online. You can either go onto YouTube or on the Jewish Report website, sajr.co.za. You can click on webinars, and all of our webinars are available in perpetuity for you to watch. So if you've missed one of our webinars, go and click there. The last thing I want to tell you before we begin this evening, and that is booking is now open for the Jewish Achiever Awards. The Jewish Achiever Awards are on the 1st of November this year. What we do, Nadav, is we open it to the community. We celebrate 10 remarkable members of our community who have built South Africa, and we give away 10 awards every single year. And this year we do that at a big gala dinner, and it's going to have a food festival associated with it as well. And it's an amazing evening. And if you point your camera at the QR code that you currently see on your screen at the moment, you will be able to book for this year's Jewish Achiever Awards. We open nominations to members of the public. We had 861 people nominated by members of the public, and we are busy deciding and shortlisting and interviewing and reviewing at the moment. 30 judges will be meeting Sunday a week, and they've got, I think, 114 interviews to get through on that day. So we're in full swing. You want to be at Jewish Achiever Awards this year, so please go and click on that bit.ly code, bit.ly JR26 book, or alternatively point your camera at that QR code that you see on your screen now. And a big thank you to Gilana, who's on controls this evening. Last thing, if you're watching us on YouTube, if you haven't clicked that like and subscribe button, this is your opportunity to go do so right now. So Nadav, we are tumbling towards an election. Tell us when the elections are and what is at stake.
The elections are to be held on October 27, so 2 months from now. And everything is at stake. The nature of Israel, the policies towards conscription, which is an essential issue in this election, the ultra-Orthodox, the policies towards Gaza, the possibilities of some sort of a new regional alignment or a new initiative that corresponds with the Trump vision of expanding the Abraham Accords, Israel's relations with the world, the questions as to responsibility for October 7, with the opposition demanding a state commission to investigate the failure of October 7, and with this government rejecting that demand for years now, not allowing that state commission to actually be built. And there is so much more here. It's also about Netanyahu's personal leadership. He has been the prime minister of Israel for the total majority of almost 17 out of the last 20 years. And because of that, it's also a very personal elections. Although in Israel, you don't elect directly the prime minister, but you go through a coalition system based on parties and relative votes. You don't have constituencies or districts in Israel like you do have in the US or the UK, for that matter. So what's at stake? Everything is at stake in this election, and this is one of the reasons that many see this as the most crucial political decision that Israel has ever made.
So has Netanyahu reached the end of his line? Can we say that maybe his 9 lives are up and this is the end of his political career? Or is he the survivor that just keeps on somehow surviving?
You know, the jury is still out, of course, and we need to see the results of the elections. I'm not going to surprise you, Howard, by saying that. But the most important thing to remember about Netanyahu is that he's a wonderful campaigner. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to somehow swing this. Right now, he's losing in the polls, and he's been losing in the polls for over 2 years now. So he actually, his coalition has lost its majority in the polls in March of 2023, 7 months before Hamas invaded the country and conducted the most massive mass murder against Jews since the Holocaust. So any way you want to cut it, he's not in a good position. And even the polls that were published just this evening by the Israeli TV channels, they're even worse to the prime minister than they were 3 weeks ago. So he's not showing any sign until now of gaining strength. On the other hand, again, this is a man that has won more election campaigns, fair and square, than probably any person alive in any democracy in the West. So he has definitely proven his worth in winning elections, and 2 months in the Middle East, and specifically in Israel, as people who are listening to us, that's an eternity. So burying him now would be really just a stupid mistake by me, a person who's been covering election campaigns in Israel since 1999. The basic principle here is that until the last 2 weeks, everything can change. usually the last 2 weeks, if you look at polls from the last 4 election campaign cycles, and by 4 I mean since 2019, because we had 4 elections since 2019. So if you look at that, the polls a week before the elections tend to be very accurate. About a week before the election tend to be extremely accurate. So if you ask me this question again on October 20, I'll be wiser.
So I want to get on to what the polls say in a second, but let's just touch base about the electoral system for people who are watching. Those of us in South Africa understand the idea of proportional representation, because that's what we have here in South Africa. There are 120 seats in the Israeli Knesset, and you get allocated seats on a proportional representation basis, the way we understand it here. The one difference, though, is that something that you have that we don't have is a threshold. Explain to us what a threshold actually means.
That threshold means that if a party is running for an election and is trying to get the public's confidence, if they don't get 3.25% of the votes that were casted, not the general population of Israel, but the votes that were actually casted, these votes just are not counted at all. So they're just lost. They're just lost completely. So people who know how the UK system works, or even voting for Congress in the US, know the principle of the winner takes it all, right? And in this case, it's the other parties that take it all, so to speak, if one party doesn't pass the threshold. Now, this is the reason why overall election campaign polls in Israel are very accurate. However, if a party doesn't cross the threshold, this can change everything. And here's why. Because the threshold is so high, that benchmark of over 3% is so substantial, that means that you either pass and get 4 seats in the Knesset or more, or you don't pass, and sometimes 4 seats in the Knesset can be absolutely lost. And 4 seats in the Knesset is a lot. And that's exactly the difference between having a government on your side, your bloc, the Netanyahu bloc, or having a government to the other bloc. That's why in 2019, a far-right party led by Ben Gvir, according to the polls, was supposed to pass that threshold. It didn't. And the right-wing bloc lost 4 seats, and Netanyahu couldn't form a government. And that's the reason why in 2022, when there was the last election, there was a party, a left-wing party, Meretz, that didn't pass the threshold, and again, between 3 and 4 seats were lost. And if they wouldn't have been lost, we would probably have an election much sooner, and the Netanyahu government either wouldn't have been formed or would have been formed in a much weaker position. So this can change everything. That benchmark of 3.25% is essential to understand Israeli politics. And there are a lot of splinter right-wing parties now that are competing on right-wing voters that are disappointed by Netanyahu because of October 7 and because of many other reasons, like conscription of the ultra-Orthodox. And these small parties are now thinking about uniting, because if they're not going to unite, none is going to pass the threshold, and all of these votes are going to be lost.
So the other thing that South Africans now understand, which we never understood before, is the concept of a coalition government. Because until now, since the advent of democracy, we've always had one party with a majority. But within the history of Israel, there has never, ever been a majority in government, not since 1948. So coalition politics are really, really crucial in getting things to work. Talk us through, give us a little insight into the electorate itself. 20% of the electorate are Arab. 12.5% are Haredi, very religious Orthodox. Talk us through kind of how the population looks.
Yeah, well, I wanna hedge us to this, because demographics and politics are not the same thing, and people have nuanced layers of identity. So the fact that someone is religious doesn't necessarily mean he's going to vote for a religiously affiliated party. And I want to stress that many of the Likud voters, the Likud considers itself a traditionalist and secular party. Many of the Likud voters are observant Jews. People who are Arab or Israeli Palestinians, as they sometimes define themselves, can vote to any party they want. There is the Israeli Communist Party. Most of the voters of the Israeli Communist Party. It was founded as a Jewish and Arab party, but most of the votes come from the Arab electorate. But it's not an Arab party, it's the Israeli Communist Party, and you have members of Knesset that are Jews there. So what I'm saying is that it's all talking in generalizations, and that's dangerous. And after that hedge that is very important for me to mention, you're right. So about 20%, 22% are non-Jews. Most of these non-Jews are Arabs, both Christians and Muslims, but also other minorities like Druze and Cherkessi, but also people who are not affiliated religiously that came from, for instance, from the former Soviet Union and don't define themselves as Jews, but made Aliyah according to the law of return that allows people who are not Jewish but have an affiliation, a genealogical affiliation to, like a Jewish grandfather, to make Aliyah to Israel. And there is a more and more substantial number of Israelis that are not religiously affiliated at all. So it's slightly over 20%, I think, these days. Then you have people who define themselves on a spectrum of the religious spectrum. On one side of that spectrum, you can talk about Masorti, traditionalist. Traditionalist can mean any number of things. It can mean people who observe the Shabbat but don't observe kosher in some sense, or observe kosher but don't observe the Shabbat, or observe some of the Shabbat but then go and see a football game on Shabbat, which isn't exactly Orthodox, right? So that's Masorti, traditionalist. And on the other side of the spectrum, there is the ultra-Orthodox, observant Jews that usually dress in a certain way with black suits and the rest. There is much less than, so one of the things that people make that mistake often is to think that there are so many ultra-Orthodox in the Israeli society. It's very much depends on how you count it. But basically, there is no doubt that this is the minority that is growing quicker than any other minority. Right now, it's growing at a pace of over 4% a year. Now, according to the Israeli Bureau of Statistics, in 2025, about 1.5 million of the Israeli 1.4 million define themselves as ultra-Orthodox. And by 2030, it will be 16%. But this...
In fact, an interesting figure is that while the ultra-Orthodox may currently be about 12.5% of the population, if you look at first graders in Israel, amongst first graders, ultra-Orthodox constitute approximately 25% of all first graders.
Or even 30%, yeah. So that's absolutely the case, because the ultra-Orthodox growth is so substantial. Anyone who's listening to us can do the math itself, 4% a year. And of course, this is 4% compounding to a certain degree. That's a very substantial growth of that minority. But, and here comes the nuance, what is ultra-Orthodox? There's a huge difference between ultra-Orthodox that vote to ultra-Orthodox parties of a certain degree or a certain nature, and for instance, the Shas voters, who are ultra-Orthodox Sfaradi, and they they have much more of a spectrum that is more, I would say, open to the Israeli society and sometimes less rigid, like other ultra-Orthodox parties that are considered to be the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox parties. Okay, now you are left with the rest of the country, and people can do the math here. About 50 to 60%, really depends how you want to count it, that define themselves either as secular or traditionalist secular. But in the Arab society, many people define themselves as secular too. To a certain degree, if you look at the Arab society today, and you look at the levels of education of women and the secularization process there is an alliance between seculars from all types of different religious groups around Israel. So it's more complicated than that. Now, in terms of voting, so it was the former president Rivlin that spoke about tribes. He spoke about Israel as a country of tribes, which was very interesting for him as president to do. It's more of a critique of a sociologist than the Israeli president, but Rivlin was known to just say what he thinks. And he talked about the tribe of the settlers, the tribe of the ultra-Orthodox, the tribe of the secular part, and the tribe of the Arabs. And he said that the Israeli society is actually a collection of tribes that have very different ideas about which country Israel should be.
So, Nadav, before we go into some of the big issues for the electorate, tell us, latest polls are out. How, of course, polls are not predictive of elections. Polls just give us a snapshot at the moment of exactly what the country is thinking. Channel 14 always seems to be way out when they produce their polls, but give us the latest and the most accurate polling that you've seen.
So it's exactly as you put it. It's a snapshot of where we are at now, and I generally believe the polls, if I don't see a big difference between the polls. You mentioned Channel 14. Channel 14 is much more positive towards the government. There is another channel, channel I-24. Again, their polls that are by a pollster that is a splinter of the pollster of Channel 14. It's not to say anything about the standards of the polling. I'm not an expert in statistics, but they are, again, rather positive towards the Prime Minister. Other than that, all the polling, including the polling I've seen tonight, basically says that the Netanyahu bloc never gets over altogether 52 seats out of 120, 53 seats out of 120. They never, when I say never, I mean the last month or month and a half, 2 months. It would be radically different to the polls to see something like 65-55 with Netanyahu getting 55 seats. He's not getting 55 seats out of 120. In order to form a government in Israel, the cliche says that you need the majority of the Knesset. The Knesset is 120 members of Knesset. You need 61. But it's a cliche. It's not the truth. The truth is that you just need a normal majority in the Knesset. You don't need a quorum. You just need a normal majority. So if 70 members of Knesset just don't show up to the vote, and you get 40 members of Knesset to support a new government, you have a new government in Israel. There's no problem. And by the way, one of the interesting things about this is, let's say you do have a new government in Israel because 70 decided to go to the beach to enjoy the beaches in Tel Aviv, and 40 voted for a new government. And that's it. This new government has only the support of 40 members of Knesset. Now they come back from the beach and they say, okay, now we want to send this government to an election. We don't want this government. They can't have it with a normal majority. They need a 61 to do that, which is very interesting. They actually need to go through a 61 non-confidence. We call it a constructive non-confidence in order to get that government out. So when it gets in, even if it's a normal majority and not an absolute majority in the Knesset, it's very difficult to get these people out of power. And this change was done so that governments in Israel won't fall every other day. And I think that's a substantial remark there. Now, Netanyahu right now doesn't hold any majority to form a government. On the other hand, I should say that the other bloc, which is now led by Gadi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff, also doesn't get an absolute majority. It doesn't get 60 or 61. Some of the polls give them 60. Some of the polls give them, sometimes on a really good week, 61. Usually they hover around anything between 57 to 59 seats, which is much better than Netanyahu, that sometimes goes down to 47, right? It's much better than Netanyahu. But still, they don't have what we call an absolute Zionist majority. That's really important. By Zionist majority, usually it's a laundered, whitewashed expression to say with no Arab parties. Because when they say Zionist, the ultra-Orthodox parties are also not Zionist. And I'm not saying this because I want to indict them. It's just they are openly non-Zionist parties. But usually when you use that in Israeli discourse, you use Zionist parties to say not the Arab parties that are openly non-Zionist. And by the way, it's their right, according to Israeli law, to run for an election without being Zionist. But right-wing parties within the Eisenkot bloc don't want to form a party. Bennett, for instance, he doesn't want to form a government with the Arab parties because they're not Zionists. And because of that, this is a hurdle or a challenge to Eisenkot. Bottom line, right now, Eisenkot is getting much more, his bloc is getting much more power, according to the polls. He can definitely form a minority government easily. That minority government is not something that you can get rid of so quickly. The Arabs might support the government, the Arab members of Knesset, from outside of the coalition. Netanyahu, according to these polls, is very far away from forming a stable government. And his main hope right now, and everything I'm saying is just true for today, okay? And I want to underline this can change tomorrow, but his best hope right now is to take the country to another elections. So basically prevent the other guy from forming a government, rather than forming a government himself, exhaust the months that the president is going to give him to form a government, and then go to another election campaign and start over because he's such in a dire condition. But again, this can change.
So I want to talk about Netanyahu because there was two things that he sold the Israeli population. The one was that he was Mr. Security. The second thing was his close relationship to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
October the 7th, and then maybe some very inconclusive military victories or military events, the non-eradication of Hamas, the non-defeat of Iran, the fact that Hezbollah is still operating in parts of Lebanon, has almost shattered this illusion of Netanyahu as Mr. Security. And the relationship to Trump, especially given Trump's failure to reach a conclusion of the Iranian war, has also become a liability. Do you see those two impacting on people's perspectives and perceptions of Netanyahu when they go to the actual ballot?
Absolutely. Netanyahu lost about 10 seats to his bloc. And these 10 seats have moved from his bloc to the other bloc. By the way, they didn't move to the left. They moved to right-wing parties like Lieberman Party or Bennett or others who are anti-Netanyahu, but they didn't move to the left. Here is the paradox in this election. The Israeli public after October 7 is moving to the right, but the person leading the country is the right-wing bloc leader and its father figure, Netanyahu. And because of that, there is an attempt boiling through the Israeli society of trying to solve the paradox. Netanyahu is the leader of the right, The public has moved to the right, but Netanyahu failed as a right-wing leader, and he's responsible for October 7. But it's more than that. October 7 right now is not dominating this campaign. What dominates this campaign is, for instance, more the conscription of the ultra-Orthodox and the way that the government served the interests of people who don't want to sign up to the army, who want to get a waiver and are getting a waiver and are not enlisted and go to the yeshivas instead, while reserve soldiers need sometimes to serve hundreds of days in reserve service, having their businesses destroyed, their families strained, etc., etc. That's more of an issue in this election right now than the responsibility for October 7. And why? And Netanyahu wanted this to happen. Why? Because it was so eroded in the last few years. Everybody had moved through the cycle of discourse. Netanyahu is responsible for October 7. The chief of staff resigned. Why didn't Netanyahu resign? The military intelligence chief resigned. Why didn't he resign? The defense minister was fired. Why wasn't Netanyahu fired? And Netanyahu managed to immunize, to vaccinate his own public, his right-wing public, the people who still support him, that are a substantial part of the Israeli society, against these arguments. And his argument is, I might have failed on October 7, but the people who really failed are the defense officials and the army. It could have happened to any prime minister. It would have happened to any prime minister. And it's a tactical failure. It's not a strategic failure that I'm responsible for. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories flying around that the Netanyahu people are not doing too much to kill or to disprove, blaming again the army. And Netanyahu also is saying, could someone have done a better job than I did? And he also might say, if you talk to him in a sort of a higher, more intellectual conversation, did Franklin Delano Roosevelt resign after Pearl Harbor? He didn't, right? Did George W. Bush resign after 9/11, right? He didn't. Why should I resign? So that goes as to October 7th. He still lost seats because of that. But most of the seats that he lost are not because of that. They are because of the judicial coup, the attempted judicial coup, sometimes labeled the judicial reform, not by me, and by this alliance with the far right and the ultra-Orthodox that is increasingly unpopular within the Israeli mainstream that used to support Netanyahu. He has lost the urban Likud voter that lives somewhere between Haifa and Ashdod, on the coastline, in Mishor HaChof, as we say in Hebrew, and people living in Ramat Gan, in Cholon, in Bat Yam, even in Ashkelon, in Ashdod, that used to vote, Netanya, Hadera, used to vote for the Likud. Most of them still vote for the Likud. But 30%, 25% say, we don't want to vote for the Likud and Netanyahu again. Still, Netanyahu, by the way, personally, his brand name is still more powerful than the brand name of his party. The Likud today, as a party, is much more in trouble than Netanyahu himself. And Netanyahu is actually carrying the Likud with his own significant brand name, as you said, as Mr. Security. Now, as to Trump, to your question, I don't think it became a real liability to Netanyahu. I think it could have become a real liability. And the Israeli public definitely was, according to polls, disappointed from some of the views or positions taken towards the end of the war. But I think it's very much watered down and diluted in the last few weeks, because the US is having this operation in Hormuz, and nothing is really moving in the Iranian front. So it was a phase that maybe could have jeopardized Netanyahu's position. But it's definite that the relationship between these two men is not what it used to be. And I'm not sure that the president will need to see if the president is going to enlist himself in order to assist the prime minister in winning an election campaign. And we know that quite quickly. Netanyahu is coming for the UN General Assembly to the US. The president can absolutely give him the kind of reception that can assist him in an election campaign just a month later. And we'll see if the president decides to do that or not.
So if the Netanyahu bloc has Netanyahu leading it, the non-Netanyahu bloc is a collection of right-wing parties, centrist parties, left-wing parties under the banner of Gadi Eisenkot. Tell us a little, for those of us who don't know Eisenkot, tell us about the man.
Yeah, so first of all, you said under the banner of Eisenkot, and I want to make clear that one of the problems with that bloc, and it was always the case with the center-right, center-left, whatever you want to call it, the anti-Netanyahu bloc, is that everyone there thinks that they should be the prime minister. So this is one of the great strengths of the Netanyahu bloc. In the Netanyahu bloc, it's very clear that they have one candidate. And generally speaking, the right wing in Israel, I can count the number of leaders it had since 1948. It was up to 1977, one candidate for prime minister, the leader of Cherut and the Likud, his name was Menachem Begin. And after 1977, in the 1980s, there was Yitzhak Shamir. After Shamir, there was Netanyahu. After Netanyahu, there was Sharon, and then Netanyahu again. That's it. That is it. Olmert was the leader of Kadima, for those of you who remember Olmert as a Likud official. So the right-wing bloc has been extremely loyal. The idea of loyalty to the leader is essential. Well, the center-left, whether it's Labor, that is now a small-time party, or whether it's centrist parties like Kadima at the time, or Benny Gantz party, everybody thinks they should be the prime minister. Avigdor Lieberman, who's the leader of a right-wing party that objects to Netanyahu, actually defected from the Netanyahu bloc years and years ago. Lieberman was the Director General of the Prime Minister's office back in 1996 when Netanyahu won the elections. He was an associate of Netanyahu for many years. Lieberman thinks he's the most equipped person to be the prime minister. And by the way, this is a man who's been Israel's foreign minister, defense minister, and minister of finance. So as far as he's concerned, why not? He doesn't have the votes, but hey, Naftali Bennett was the prime minister with less than 10 seats in the Knesset in the previous Change coalition. Now Bennett thinks he should be the candidate too. Benny Gantz, which used to be part of this bloc and now is probably defecting to the other side, to the right-wing Netanyahu-led bloc, which is also interesting. This is a man who was the candidate to be prime minister not 10 years ago, 5 years ago. From this bloc, is now joining Netanyahu. So he thinks he should be the prime minister. And I can go on and on. So that's as to Eisenkot. Now, right now, Eisenkot is the leader of the biggest party. He emerged simply because of his popularity. He's a former chief of staff. He's a classic Zionist. He comes from what Israelis sometimes call the serving elite, which means he didn't grow up as an elite. He grew up as the son of people who made Aliyah from Morocco. He grew up in places like Eilat and Tveria, Tiberias, so really Israeli periphery. He's of course himself of Moroccan descent. And he made his way through the Israeli army. And he made his way through a field infantry regiment that is an essential part of Israeli history, Golani, and it's always considered to be excellent infantry brigade, but it's also the people's infantry brigade. It's not the parachuters, it's not the tzanchanim. It's very much associated with the idea that it represents the people. And Eisenkot himself has this tendency, he might look to people who don't know him, like a simple thinking, You don't hear a lot of interviews with him in English, if at all. He's a very sophisticated persona, very sophisticated general and leader of the IDF at the time, very well read, reading all the time, both mostly kind of strategic and military and non-fiction, but also other things. And he's very shrewd. So his street whiz is extremely impressive. Now, what's interesting about Netanyahu is that
can I say, and also paid an enormous personal price, both himself and his family.
Yes, of course. I should have opened with that he lost his son during the war. His son was killed in Gaza during an operation that was supposed to secure the return of bodies of hostages that were killed during the war. His son Gal Eisenkot was killed in action, in battle, and he also lost his nephew. And that's an example I opened by the serving elite, and I didn't go through that point that is important. Now, what's interesting about Eisenkot is that you had a number of Israeli politicians that I don't want to call them Netanyahu wannabes, but definitely they were Netanyahu 2.0. And a good example is Bennett. And again, I don't want to reduce Bennett to say that he tried to mimic Netanyahu. But Bennett is, to some degree, similar. He has a similar biography. Netanyahu and himself are both Ashkenazim. They come from a well-established family. Bennett's family came from the US. Netanyahu's family spent a lot of time in the US. They both served in Sayeret Matkal, Israel's premium commander unit, definitely not Golani. Both of them did not go up to the ranks of any senior leadership role in the army. I know that Netanyahu, for many people abroad, is considered to be Mr. Security. You need to understand that within the Defense Administration of Israel, people say, look, he was a major in the army. They are not dismissing this in Sayeret Matkal, but he wasn't like a regiment commander or anything up to that. He wasn't one of the chiefs of staff. So both of them weren't there. Both of them have great English and communication skills, right? Both of them pride themselves in that and their ability to create spins and what have you. Eisenkot is everything that Netanyahu isn't. Considered modest, almost shy, not exactly a charismatic orator. Never tried to be a charismatic orator. Nobody will say about Eisenkot that he looks amazing on TV, unlike Netanyahu or maybe Benny Gantz, for instance, this tall figure. And Eisenkot is different, and this gives him strength. Right now, Netanyahu is trying to break that. He might succeed, presenting Eisenkot as someone who's going to give legitimacy to the Arab parties, join with the Arab parties, presenting him as a lefty, a wide-eyed lefty that doesn't understand anything about security. Netanyahu's channels attack Eisenkot, sometimes even mentioning his family, although he lost his son in battle in Gaza. But they are trying to erode the value of the way that the Israeli public really has an appreciation to the immense loss of the Eisenkot family. And they're trying to erode that in very sophisticated ways by mentioning stuff about Eisenkot's family that are not directly related to him losing his son. But these kind of statements that border on that, and then people attack those channels or newspapers for going through that cycle. But what they're actually doing is very sophisticated. So a lot of it is employed in order to break the Eisenkot aura that definitely exists now. Right now, he is at his peak, according to the polls. And one of the worries of the Eisenkot people is that, you can go to another peak from a peak, but you can definitely find yourself starting to be eroded.
So Nadav, I want to do the impossible. I want to give you topics, and I want to give you 30 seconds on each topic, which I know is almost impossible to do, but I think there's so many issues that people want to cover. Before we do that, I want to remind people, if you're watching us on YouTube, if you haven't clicked that like and subscribe button, this is the moment to do that. We don't ask much of you, but that's certainly one of the things that we do ask. The second thing is, if you have a question, we're going to bring back David and Josh in a few minutes, and they're going to be asking the audience questions through to Nadav. So if you haven't asked a question, or if you still want to ask a question, please put it into the comments on Zoom, on YouTube and Facebook now. But can I ask you, keep your questions short. We have these long sprawling questions, and as you see, Nadav takes a long time answering questions, so we're going to try hold both you and Nadav to as short questions and as short answers as possible, something almost impossible. So Nadav, let's begin with some of the 30-second answers.
Yeah.
Netanyahu's corruption trial, how's that impacting?
Not too much of an impact to the Netanyahu corruption trial. It's very clear that we're not going to have a verdict before the elections, right? And if there is an influence, the influence is that for Netanyahu, this election is more about winning or losing. It can be about his personal freedom. If he loses the elections, then the chances of him actually going to jail is increased. I don't think that Netanyahu is going to go to jail anyway, even if he loses the elections, and even if the court sentences him and says that, basically indicts him. I don't think he's going to go to jail anyway.
How about judicial reform? Is that still an issue?
I think the judicial overhaul is still in the background of this election, very much so. And here's where. Israelis that don't support Netanyahu fear that if the government is going to win again, if this coalition is going to win again, they are going to implement severe changes into the Israeli governance to the extent of Israel losing its democratic traits altogether. And this is the reason why this election is seen as so crucial by the center-left, and some of the right-wing parties that operate against Netanyahu. They're basically saying if we don't win this election, it might be the last free and equal election in the history of Israel.
I think many of us in the diaspora have been enormously embarrassed by the inclusion of people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich in the government of Israel. The extreme right wing, keeping them in, has to impact on the very nature and soul of the Israeli state, and certainly embarrasses many Jews around the world. How do you think people in Israel react to that, or is that a non-factor in their voting?
So first of all, I need to say that as an Israeli, I'm embarrassed, and I'm not more than embarrassed. I think it's a moral travesty. I think it goes against the values of the state of Israel. And I definitely hold the prime minister responsible, because he decided that these people could be part of the Israeli government, part of the Israeli coalition. And he promised in the last few years that Ben Gvir is not going to be a minister in his government. And he broke that promise. And what we're seeing right now is that it means actual things, not only for Israelis and for the Israeli security, and the fact that there is a severe deterioration in personal security in Israel. Ben Gvir is responsible for the police, so he gave him a really important brief, but also in Israel's standing around the world. He just is serving in his actions every enemy to the state of Israel and every critic of Zionism and every anti-Semite. He's just their most powerful weapon. And after saying that, I don't think it's enough the way that it's being discussed in the Israeli election campaign and cycle. I don't think people understand the severity of damage done to Israel, and one of my jobs is to try to explain them. I just saw an interesting article by Amit Segal, who wrote in his Friday column that Ben Gvir shouldn't be part of any future Israeli government. I was really happy to read Amit saying that, because Amit can convince more people than I can, because he comes from a more right-wing environment.
Another, talking about embarrassing things for many of us in the diaspora, is the settler violence, which seems to be just rampant, out of control. Yesterday, we had Ben Gvir's deputy, Sukkot, going into a Palestinian village and smashing down a monument. But there seems to be police protection, army protection for rampant settler violence. That homes are burnt, trees are cut down, livestock is stolen. How can any government actually permit that to happen?
I think it's an excellent question, and I write about this continuously. And everything I just said about Ben Gvir being part of government, about the moral decay and the moral travesty there is true 1,000 times more for what's happening in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. I see this as really a betrayal of any Jewish value, human value, and the principles of the State of Israel. Now, factually speaking, what's really happening is that the police that is controlled by Ben Gvir is not doing their jobs, and it's the police that actually needs to arrest or stop Israeli citizens who violate the law in the West Bank. This is how the Israeli system works. The police is not doing its job, then you turn to the army. But the army doesn't have the Israeli army can't go into Israeli civilians' homes and arrest them. It's illegal. Like, it's illegal probably in South Africa too that the army would do that. You need the police to do that, and or the secret services. The secret service, the Shabak, Shin Bet is doing more, but they're not doing enough. And I fear that this could be a liability for Israel's future. That this could lead to actions that will have no return, terror attacks by Jews that would lead, for instance, to an escalation in the West Bank. Now, I don't want to water down or downplay the Palestinian terror that also exists in the West Bank, and is substantial. There is a substantial infrastructure of Palestinian terror there. And one of the worries that the Israeli Defense Administration has is that if this goes out of control, we will all pay the price. And to a certain degree, the fundamentalists on both sides want this to go out of control. But the problem there is that parts of the Israeli coalition actually either support or enable the fundamentalists on our side. And that's a huge problem, and that's a precedent. And I have nothing good to say about that.
We saw a few years ago protests, the tents on the streets, the cottage cheese protests. The Israeli economy, is that still an issue, and is that an election issue?
It is an election issue, interestingly enough, but again, not enough of an issue. If you measure in polls what Israelis care about most, you ask them, is it Iran? Is it cost of living? Is it the education system? Usually what comes on in first is the cost of living, then the education, the crisis in the education system in Israel, in schools, which is something the diasporas usually don't know anything about unless they have family members living in Israel, and then they probably hear from the parents a lot of complaints. And then the Iran war comes in a distant third, tackling the Iranian threats. No, Israelis want to focus on getting back to life after these very difficult 3 years. But do parties actually manage to capitalize on this? My answer right now is no. One of the problems is that even if you want to be this kind of party, the news cycle usually injects these doses of security threats, attacks, etc., and then this dominates the news, and you can't get yourself into the news cycle talking about the cost of living, although this is what interests the Israelis most.
So I want to almost switch for a moment, and I want to talk about the Arab parties, for want of a better description. We saw, for example, Mahmoud Abbas, who's of course not part of the Israeli electoral process, but calling elections for the West Bank. And then we've heard nothing since. Are there going to be Palestinian elections taking place before the end of the year within the West Bank?
So first of all, there is a decision to have an election in the West Bank, And according to some of the polls I'm seeing, I'm referring mainly to Dr. Shkaki's poll. He's probably the most famous Palestinian pollster around, and usually the EU, the US, others have worked with him in the past. They're saying that Hamas in the West Bank is very weakened compared to what it was. And by weakened, I mean they don't get 30%, 3-0, and they used to get much more than that right after October 7. And so that is as to the Palestinian Authority. But you began your question, Howard, with asking about Israeli parties, if I understood correctly, right?
Yeah, so I want to talk about Ram because there was an interesting announcement that came last week. Ram being one of the traditional Arab parties, but announced that in fact they may have a Zionist as number 2, being an Israeli former police head as number 2 on their polls, on their list.
Yes, that's very interesting. Ram is a very interesting story. So this is an Arab party that is actually the party of the Islamic movement in Israel, what we call the Southern Islamic movement. Southern means not the Galilean Islamic movement that was outlawed. It was led by a man called Sheikh Raed Salah, and he was convicted, and it's considered extremely radical, Islamist and radical. But the southern part of the Islamic movement, that is a splinter group, is considered moderate, and the person leading their party is definitely a transitional figure in Israeli politics, and that's Mansour Abbas. Mansour Abbas is the first leader of an Arab party that was part of an Israeli coalition in its history. It was the Change coalition under the leadership of Bennett and Lapid. That year in which they controlled Israel and were replaced eventually by Netanyahu again. And Abbas is seen as a very brave leader, in the sense that he says to the Arab public, we need to talk less about the Palestinian issue and to talk more about our own problems. For instance, crime in the Arab street public electorate is something that really troubles Arab Israeli citizens of the country. And by the way, they blame Ben Gvir for not caring about what's happening in their own towns and villages simply because they're Arabs. But they want the Israeli police to fight crime on their streets and villages. And during that Change coalition brief year, it managed to do so very impressively. And this is one of the reasons that Mansour Abbas is managing to maintain his popularity. His promise is, we want to influence decision makers. And he was actually legitimized by Netanyahu himself. So the first Israeli leader or politician that offered him to join the government was Netanyahu. And only after that failed, he was offered the same by Bennett and Lapid. Now Yoav Segalovich, who's another member of Knesset that ran with Yair Lapid, is probably going to be placed in an Arab Islamic party and run in the election. And that's very interesting to see, and it could actually influence the elections, because it's you kind of think about it this way. Yoav Segalovich is a former officer in the Israeli police. He's definitely a Zionist. And he's going to run in a non-Zionist Islamic party. So that's a plus for the bloc that is trying to replace Netanyahu, because they always can count on his vote. And nobody can say about him that he doesn't support Zionism.
We've also seen Yosef Haddad announce he's forming a party. He's a very strong pro-Zionist Arab voice within Israeli politics. Do you think that will have any impact at all?
It might have an impact. Yosef Haddad is joining Ofer Winter. Ofer Winter is a lieutenant general, retired, extremely right-wing, wants, for instance, to somehow get all the Gazans out of Gaza, kind of remarks. Not far from Smotrich or Ben Gvir in his positions, but for conscription of the ultra-Orthodox. He just formed a party, and Yosef Haddad joined his party. And that's, again, a right-wing party, could also be described maybe as a far-right party, but Netanyahu very much dislikes them because they threaten his bloc, and he's not sure they're going to go with him. So he's trying to kill that party with Yosef Haddad and many others inside that party.
So we're just trying to bring David and Josh back in order to answer to ask audience questions. We're just having some difficulty, not quite sure why it's not letting us at this point in time. But Nadav, have we got a few more minutes to spend with us?
I've got another 7 minutes exactly before I go on another Zoom.
Okay. I want to know, Israeli-Palestinian relations don't seem to be a major factor in these elections. Tell us why.
Because there is an understanding within the Israeli society that there's not going to be any Palestinian state anytime soon. So nobody thinks that this is going to be a real issue that the next government will need to decide. There isn't much of a difference between what Netanyahu is saying about the fate of the West Bank or Eisenkot is saying. The difference is law and order. The difference is Jewish terrorism. That's the difference. But even there, it's not that Netanyahu is saying, I support the Jewish terrorists. He doesn't. He condemns them. So even there, it's a very hard way to sort of try to maintain a conflict politically that will manufacture an added value to any of the sides.
So I'm going to ask both David and Josh. They've been going through some of the questions that people are asking online. And maybe if you can ask a 10-second question, Nadav will give us a few 10-second answers. Josh, shall we start with you? What question most attracted your fancy?
From Barbara Abramovich. What do you think about small political parties that might just pass the voting threshold or might not? Is it worth using up that vote?
I don't know if it's the request to recommend or what. I think people should vote for whatever they feel describes their values and opinions most accurately, and they shouldn't think too much about thresholds. Because if we start thinking like that, then we all vote as tacticians, and we're not good political tacticians, but we do know who represents us well. So that's a general rule. Now, if you come to the evening of the elections and you see that according to every poll, the party that represents you is not passing the threshold, then you need to rethink your decisions. But you need to do that. You can do that in the last moment inside the booth. You don't need to do that before that.
Dave, what question do you want to pose to Nadav?
Nadav, I'm going to use my co-host prerogative and ask you a question myself. How come you don't see more dissent between national religious and the Haredi parties, even though national religious would say their number one priority is the draft?
Well, that's exactly the case. Bezalel Smotrich, who was the National Religious Party, was the number one collaborator with the ultra-Orthodox in this Knesset, and he didn't prioritize the draft at all. He prioritized killing the draft, killing the idea of equal conscription. So in that sense, he totally turned his back on his own voters, and that's the reason he's struggling. That's the reason Ofer Winter, who you're going to hear his name a lot in the next 2 months, has formed a party, and that's the reason right now, according to some of the polls, he's killing Smotrich to the horror of Netanyahu, because the only difference between them is the conscription issue. That's the only difference. And so what you're actually pointing at is something that they're using in the election campaign to change where things are standing.
Josh, you've got 10 seconds to answer a question and ask a question. And while you do that, if you'd like to leave a comment for Nadav, this is your opportunity, whether you're watching on Zoom, YouTube, or on Facebook. Leave a comment, give him thanks. He's given up a chunk of his day to spend with us, and we're enormously grateful for that. So, Josh, have you got a 10-second question?
Recently, I think it was one of the ultra-Orthodox parties launched their campaign, And in their campaign launch, they went after how strong they are for soldiers, even though they've spent the better part of 3 years fighting against the draft. Are people naive enough to fall for that? What's the strategy there?
Well, people are always naive enough to fall for the things they agree with. Voting in Israel is extremely tribal, and as an indicator, the more the person is more religious, it's easier to predict his voting patterns. I'm not saying that we know. I'm saying that it's easier to predict, and many people are want to be convinced by their own side. In the entire political system in Israel, probably it's the same in South Africa. There is about less than 10% of the public who really are thinking, who am I going to vote for? And are making their minds between the two blocks. All the rest are very much entrenched within their bloc. It doesn't really matter. So these 10 seats of public, of electorate, these are the people who are going to decide everything. These are the people who might change their minds. All the rest are just asking for justifications for their prior opinions, which, by the way, is the case in many countries around the world, in most election campaigns, all the time. Israel isn't special.
Dave, you can sneak in one very quick question.
Yeah, one last one for me. Just almost a continuation of the discussion around Ram. You know, it is an interesting thing, the fact that you now have Yoav Segalovich, who is from Yesh Atid, joining Ram, and then Yosef Haddad joining what is considered by you, a right-wing, almost settler party. Do you think this is a transition, almost a shift from what you and many, many other Israeli analysts call Zionist parties to kind of a more general understanding about how Arab Israelis play their political role in Israel?
I'm not sure it's such a shift, and I'm also not sure that it's going to work well for the center-left bloc or for the change bloc. I'm not sure, because I see, for instance, that Mansour Abbas just this morning had a post on Facebook saying we accepted the idea that Israel is a Jewish country because we were forced to, and we would be outlawed as parties if we wouldn't have. And this was used by the prime minister and the entire right-wing bloc to say, he's literally saying in Arabic that he doesn't accept the nature of this country at all, and he's a Trojan horse. And this is exactly the kind of imagery that was used by the prime minister today in an AI video. So the fact that Segalovich is running with him, and that there is such an affiliation between Ram and Mansour Abbas and between Eisenkot, could lead to very severe repercussions for the change and the Eisenkot and the entire opposition. Because one thing needs to be clear, and I'll end with that: Israelis have moved to the right. To those of you who look at the polls or saying Netanyahu is going to lose, or they have moved to the right. And part of it is skepticism towards the Arab population, electorate, politics of the region. The thinking of Israelis is, we withdrew from Gaza, look what we got. We withdrew from Lebanon, look what we got. We don't know if we can trust completely the Arabs around us. And this skepticism, if Netanyahu can use it, can extend it, can play with it, can make it the subject of the day for this election campaign, he might be able to save his entire endeavor and win the prime ministership again. Because of that, I'm not sure that Segalovich is going to play well for that bloc. I want to thank you all. I need to go on a different Zoom. I want to thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. One last question as you leave. If you're a betting man, who's the next prime minister of Israel?
I'm not going to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Nadav. Thank you. Good night to you.
Thank you,
maybe
Nadav.
Josh and David can stay on for a second, and we'll just continue the conversation for one second. That was an amazing interview and an amazing broad perspective on the Israeli elections. What did you guys think? Dave?
Yeah, I thought it was great. Thanks, Howie. I mean, obviously moderated amazingly as always. I think, just understanding, what this is really, I think one of the most consequential elections that in the history of Israel. And really there could be more of the same or, a massive change. To think that Bibi has been prime minister for 17 out of the last 20 years is absolutely incredible. And there could be unbelievable change coming or not. Who knows? No one
You
wants to
know,
make a bet.
I've never ever met a politician who thought they were replaceable, and yet the world continues regardless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Josh, your opinions before our closing parting shots for the evening.
It was a very interesting discussion. Even having lived in Israel for 14 years and voted, I don't know, 10 times, lots of elections in Israel, I still learned a lot. And it's great to always learn more. And I'm looking forward to the next in our series. And
Well,
thank you very much, Howie.
I want to thank the Zionist Federation, the Cape Council, just for your amazing determination to inform our community, inform South Africa, and inform people around the world. I think we are greatly enriched by this process that you've taken us on, by the amazing guests that you've managed to secure for us, and just by doing this, you've shown true leadership in our community. And I just want to thank both of you and your committees and your professional staff. And Yvette is just an absolute rock star as well. You guys have been amazing, and it's just such an honor and pleasure to partner with you in this process and really delving deep down. Maybe people walk away with a far greater understanding, and that's really what we're about during these webinars. So from those of us who've gone through the 200th webinar of the Jewish Report, an amazing good night to all of you. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll do one of these again, probably a little closer to the elections, and just such a privilege to spend the night with you all. Good night.
Thank you, Howie.
Thank you.